rain hammered Manhattan like 1,000 broken drums bouncing off glass towers and pooling in the neon veins of Fifth Avenue. The Friday night traffic snarled horns slicing through the storm headlights, smearing into white streaks. People hunched under umbrellas, heads down, moving fast, trying to pretend the city wasn't drowning. And then one scream cut through it all. "Somebody help, there's a child in the street." Time fractured. Every sound bent toward that single voice. On the slick asphalt, a boy no older than 7 darted from the curb, his tuxedo too big for his thin frame, his patent leather shoes slipping against the rain-slicked crosswalk. He wasn't running toward safety. He was running headlong into the chaos, into a grid of steel glass and 2 tons of moving metal. Brakes shrieked. Tires fishtailed. Yellow cabs skidded sideways, drivers cursing as they fought to control the spin. A delivery truck jackknifed just yards away, horn blaring so loud it rattled the windows of the luxury boutiques that lined the avenue. The boy froze, eyes, wide hair plastered to his forehead, the rain turning his tuxedo into a second skin. 30 floors above, in the penthouse suite of Manhattan's most expensive residential tower, champagne still flowed. Flashbulbs still popped. The applause of New York's elite rolled like thunder against the windows, oblivious to the storm and oblivious to the fact that a child was about to die on the street below. But not everyone was blind. On the sidewalk, a woman in scrubs dropped her tote without hesitation. She didn't look left. She didn't look right. She just ran. Shoes splashing through puddles hard in her throat, she tore into the intersection as if her body had been waiting its whole life for this moment. The storm swallowed her silhouette, a streak of blue fabric against the glare of headlights, as she lunged for the boy. Metal screamed. A cab missed her by inches. A delivery truck skidded sideways, spraying water like shrapnel. Still, she moved forward. One arm reached, stretching through rain and panic. The boy stumbled, his knees buckling on the slick pavement. And in that breathless heartbeat before impact, before silence, her hand closed around his arm. They went down hard, the asphalt unforgiving. The crowd gasped from the sidewalk. For a fraction of a second, the world held its breath. And then life returned in the form of a ragged child's sob. The woman pulled the boy against her chest, rain soaking them both, shielding him with her body as traffic screeched to a halt around them. Her voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone who'd seen panic before and refused to let it win. "You're safe now. You're safe." The city exhaled. Bystanders pressed forward, some filming with their phones, others shouting in disbelief. But in that circle of wet asphalt and neon light, there were only 2 people who mattered: a boy who had been running from something far more terrifying than traffic, and the stranger who had chosen without a second thought to put her body between him and death. What neither of them knew, what no one on Fifth Avenue could possibly guess, was that this moment would tear open the secret seams of one of America's wealthiest families. A billion-dollar empire balanced on image and silence was about to crumble, all because a child ran into the rain and a stranger refused to let him fall. A home can be a fortress or a display case. That was the first thing that struck Amara when the elevator doors slid open 30 floors above the chaos of Fifth Avenue. Just hours earlier, she had knelt in the rain, clutching a terrified boy to her chest, while traffic screamed around them. Now, as she stepped into the glass and marble penthouse of Damon Reed, she felt as though she had entered a museum where the exhibits were living people expected to stand still. The place gleamed with curated perfection, polished ebony floors, white leather sofas, walls lined with abstract art no child would ever dare to touch. A silent team of handlers glided through the rooms like ghosts, adjusting champagne flutes, straightening orchids, collecting empty plates from the previous night's celebration. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and money. It was the kind of space designed for magazine covers, not bedtime stories. Damon was there, phone pressed to his ear, pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a photograph. His voice was clipped, authoritative. "We need to close the Dubai deal by quarter's end. If they push back, sweeten the equity but not the control." He ended the call only to immediately accept another. This time, a charity gala planner asking whether he preferred the gold or platinum donor tier. He barely glanced at the boy curled up on the sofa, knees drawn tight to his chest, clutching a stuffed lion so worn its mane had flattened into patches. Micah, 7 years old, in a tuxedo, still damp from the storm, silent as stone. The same boy who had cried into Amara's shoulder on Fifth Avenue, whispering that he didn't want to call Cassandra Mom. Now he sat in the sterile glow of the penthouse, refusing the plate of food a housekeeper had placed in front of him. Chicken skewers, salmon tartare, fruit sculpted into flowers, expensive food for executives, not comfort food for children. His hands tightened around the stuffed lion. The animal's stitched eyes, one nearly loose, stared out with the same mute desperation. Damon finally ended his string of calls and turned toward the boy. For the first time since the rain, hesitation crept into his features. "Micah," he said gently, crouching down. "You need to eat something." The boy buried his face in the lion's mane and shook his head. Damon sighed, frustration seeping through his fatigue. He looked up, and that was when his gaze collided with Amara's. She had come reluctantly. Damon had insisted just for a short visit, he'd said, because Micah had asked for her. Now standing in this cavern of wealth and silence, she wondered if she'd made a mistake. But then she saw the boy's hunched shoulders, the way his small fingers clenched around the stuffed animal like a lifeline, and she knew why she was here. "Would you like me to try?" she asked softly. Damon hesitated, pride warring with need. Then he stepped aside. Amara crossed the room, slowly lowering herself onto the sofa beside Micah. She didn't push the food. Instead, she nodded toward the lion. "What's his name?" For the first time that day, Micah lifted his eyes. "Simba," he whispered. His voice was so small it almost disappeared in the echo of marble walls. "That's a brave name," Amara said. "But even brave lions get hungry. Do you think Simba might like a grilled cheese sandwich instead of fancy party food?" Micah blinked as if unsure he had heard right. "Grilled cheese," she smiled, "with the crust cut off. My son Zion used to say the corners were too sharp." Her voice wavered for just a heartbeat, but she steadied it before the ache could spill through. "Come on, let's see what we can find." Damon watched bewildered as the two disappeared into the kitchen. Minutes later, the silence of the penthouse was broken by the sizzling of butter on a hot pan. Amara stood at the stove in borrowed slippers, guiding Micah as he clumsily pressed bread into a skillet. Cheese oozed, bread browned unevenly, and when she cut the sandwich into shapes with a cookie cutter, the hearts came out lopsided, leaning to one side as though melting. But when she set the plate in front of Micah, he picked up a piece and ate for the first time in days. It was not just a bite of food. It was an act of surrender to trust. Damon stood in the doorway, silent, watching his son chew slowly, his eyes flicking between Simba, the sandwich, and Amara's steady presence. Something in Damon's chest tightened, a sensation he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Gratitude. Guilt. A gnawing recognition that this woman had reached his child in ways he himself had not. Later that night, the penthouse lights dimmed. The handlers disappeared, the housekeepers retired to their quarters, and silence draped itself over the rooms like velvet. Damon moved from call to call in his office, trying to drown the memory of his son running into traffic with contracts and numbers. But when the clock slid past 7, he noticed the hush was different, softer, expectant. He followed the faint glow down the hallway. In Micah's bedroom, the decor was immaculate. A designer bedspread, books arranged by color, a view of the skyline glittering like spilled diamonds. Yet it felt empty, as if no child had ever truly lived there. On the nightstand stood something new, a small nightlight shaped like a star, glowing warm against the sterile white. Amara sat on the rug beside the bed, Simba tucked under one arm, Micah under the other. Her voice was gentle, steady. "Who do we remember tonight?" she asked. Micah's lips trembled. For a long moment he said nothing, then almost inaudible, "Mommy." The word cracked in the middle, fragile as glass. Amara nodded. "Tell me one thing you remember about her." Tears welled in Micah's eyes. She used to sing when it rained. She said thunder was just the sky rolling over so the sun could breathe. His small chest hitched. "I can't remember the song anymore." Amara's arm tightened around him. "That's okay. You don't have to remember every word. You just have to remember how it felt." She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather portfolio, edges frayed. She opened it carefully, revealing drawings crumpled with age. "My son Zion drew these. He would have been 8 this year." Her voice was steady, but her fingers lingered on the paper. "He liked to draw superheroes who weren't perfect, heroes who cried sometimes, because he thought being brave meant keeping your heart open." Micah touched the page with reverence. "What happened to him?" Amara swallowed, then spoke with measured honesty. "Sometimes bad things happen that even the strongest heroes can't fight. Zion got sick and he couldn't stay. But love doesn't disappear. It moves." She touched her chest. "It lives here, and here." She touched Micah's small hand. "Every time we remember them with kindness, they're still with us." From the doorway, Damon froze. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but he couldn't move. His son's face, usually shuttered now, glowed softly in the star-shaped light. Micah leaned against Amara, breathing steadier than Damon had seen in months. And Damon realized with a jolt of shame that he had been outsourcing his son's grief to therapists, tutors, and schedules, when what the boy needed was presence, patience, and someone unafraid to speak of loss. The ritual ended with silence, not forced but chosen. Micah curled beneath the covers, Simba tucked under his chin, his small fingers still brushing the edge of Zion's drawing. Amara turned off the overhead lamp, leaving only the star-shaped nightlight casting its warm glow against the walls. For a fleeting moment, Damon allowed himself to imagine this becoming routine. Not a nurse, not an employee, but someone who could help his son remember love instead of burying it. He opened his mouth, ready to speak, but then the air shifted. A sharp knock echoed against the bedroom doorframe. Cassandra Vale stepped inside, her designer heels silent against the rug, her smile polished for audiences who weren't here. She took in the nightlight, the drawings, the boy already drifting into the first peaceful sleep he'd had in days. And her smile hardened into something brittle, dangerous. "We'll need to put an end to bedtime theatrics," she said smoothly, her eyes never leaving Amara. The words were delivered like a blade wrapped in velvet, slicing through the fragile calm of the room. "Power loosens its tie and gets flour on its hands." Cassandra's words still hung in the air long after she left the bedroom, sharp as glass in Damon's mind. Bedtime theatrics. As if grief were a performance, as if his son's small body relaxing for the first time in weeks had been some staged trick. Amara said nothing. She only touched the star-shaped nightlight on Micah's table and whispered goodnight before stepping into the hallway. Damon trailed her silently, unable to form the words that swelled behind his ribs. The next morning, the penthouse was once again a cathedral of glass and routine. Handlers moved efficiently, checking schedules, laying out Damon's suits. But Micah did not stir from his room. When Damon finally peeked in, he found the boy awake, eyes open, Simba tucked beneath his chin. He had not cried, not spoken, not moved, just waiting. "Would you like breakfast?" Damon asked. The boy shook his head. Damon felt a familiar helplessness knotting in his stomach. And then Amara appeared in the doorway, hair tied back, still in simple scrubs. "Maybe he needs something different," she said. "Different?" Damon frowned. "Something made, not delivered," she replied. "Come with me." In the kitchen, the marble counters gleamed untouched by anything resembling life. Amara rummaged through polished cabinets until she found cocoa powder, sugar, flour. "Cookies," she announced. "But not just any. We're making galaxy cookies." Micah looked skeptical, eyes following as she set out bowls. "What's that?" "Messy cookies," she grinned. "Lumpy, crooked, covered in sugar dust like stars. Zion used to say the ugly ones tasted better because they had more love inside." For the first time that day, a flicker of curiosity warmed Micah's face. He slid off the bar stool, patted over, and reached for the bowl. Amara guided his hands. "Pour the flour. Not too much. Good. Now stir like you mean it." The kitchen, once sterile, came alive. Cocoa dust puffed into the air, clinging to Damon's $1,000 tie when Micah giggled mid-pour. Sugar spilled across the counter like white sand. Amara didn't scold. She laughed, a sound that invited rather than corrected. Damon, standing useless at first, found himself loosening his tie, rolling up his sleeves. "Here." Amara handed him a whisk. "Make yourself useful." He hesitated, then obeyed. The motion felt foreign, his hand accustomed to signing contracts, not mixing batter. Micah leaned close, watching him with cautious awe. "Dad," the boy whispered, "you got flour on your nose." Damon blinked. Then Micah giggled, an unguarded, bubbling sound Damon hadn't heard since before Janelle's death. It hit him like a physical blow. When the cookies emerged, they were disasters. Lumpy, uneven, scattered with powdered sugar that refused symmetry. Amara held one up. "See a galaxy. Imperfect but full of stars." She handed it to Micah. The boy bit crumbs falling down his tuxedo shirt he still refused to remove. His eyes widened. He laughed again, louder this time. The room shifted. For a moment, the penthouse felt alive. Not a museum, but a kitchen where a boy could be messy, a father could be clumsy, and grief could breathe without judgment. Later, as the flour settled and the cookies cooled, Amara wiped her hands. Damon watched her carefully. "You make it sound so easy," he said. "It isn't," she replied quietly. "But grief isn't something you get over. It's something you choose how to carry. Some days it feels heavy. Some days it's lighter. But the choice is in how you carry it, not whether you ignore it." Micah looked up at her cookie still in hand. "So I don't have to forget, Mommy?" "No," Amara said, kneeling so her eyes were level with his. "You never have to forget. You just have to decide how you'll remember her." The boy nodded solemnly, as if she had handed him a truth too big for his years, yet one he had been waiting to hear. Damon's throat tightened. That evening the fragile peace shattered. Cassandra had arranged a dinner insisting Micah attend. "He needs structure," she declared. "Exposure to our world." Against his better judgment, Damon agreed, telling himself it was harmless. The dining room glowed with candlelight table lined with silver cutlery, wine glasses catching the light. Guests in tailored suits filled the seats, laughter, rehearsed smiles sharp. Micah was dressed in a miniature suit, hair slicked back, placed between Damon and Cassandra like another accessory. "Micah," Cassandra prompted with a gleaming smile, "tell Mr. Whitman about your school." The boy stared at his plate. Fork in hand, he cut his steak into smaller and smaller pieces, none of which he ate. Silence stretched. Cassandra's smile stiffened. "Micah, don't be rude." His fork clattered. "I don't want to talk about school." He burst out, voice trembling. "I want to talk about Mommy, but nobody ever wants to talk about Mommy." The room froze. Guests glanced at one another, uncomfortable, eager to escape the sudden fracture in the performance. Damon felt every eye turned toward him. His son's face was pale, trembling, tears shining in the candlelight. Cassandra's laugh rang brittle. "Children have such imaginations." She waved a hand as if dismissing a servant. "Micah, why don't you go to your room and let the adults finish?" Before Damon could move, Amara appeared in the doorway. She walked with quiet steadiness, her gaze fixed only on the boy. She knelt beside him, ignoring the stares of the wealthy audience. "Your mom exists every time you remember her laugh," she said softly. "Every time you do something kind because she taught you kindness. Every time you're brave the way she taught you to be brave." Micah's shoulders shook. Then he turned, throwing his arms around her neck. His sobs muffled against her shoulder, but his breathing steadied. "Naomi, please take him to his room," Cassandra said, her voice crisp, her smile strained. "The adults are having a conversation." Amara rose slowly, Micah clinging to her hand. She turned, voice calm but firm. "With respect, Miss Vale, he is a person, not an accessory. Grief isn't something you schedule around a business dinner." The room fell silent. Damon felt the weight of truth press down on him, heavier than any contract he had ever signed. But he said nothing. He let silence choke the moment, too weak, too conflicted to speak. And he hated himself for it. That night, long after the guests left, Damon sat alone in his office. His tie hung loose, flour still faint on his cuff from the morning. On his desk, his laptop glowed with unopened emails. When he finally clicked one, the subject line made his stomach drop. From private security desk to Cassandra Vale, subject Collins, background summary. He opened the attachment. Grainy photos. Headlines. A report: Amara Collins, formerly employed at St. Mary's Pediatric Ward, terminated following fire incident. Pending liability claim at the time of departure. At the bottom, Cassandra's fixer had scrawled a note: "Use carefully. Could be spun either way." Damon leaned back in his chair, the flower on his cuff catching in the light, as if to remind him of the laughter he had heard that morning. The sound of his son alive again. And yet here in black and white, a seed of doubt had been planted. The folder Cassandra had dropped on his desk still sat unopened when Damon returned home. But he didn't need to flip the pages. The images already played in his mind like a surveillance reel. Amara and Micah on a Brooklyn street. A battered sign over the doorway, the Beacon House. His son smiling in a way Damon hadn't seen in months, a bowl of soup balanced in his hands, his shoulders relaxed. Cassandra's voice had been smooth, practiced. She's grooming him, making him guilty, making him a target. That night, Damon barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw two competing truths: the boy clutching a stuffed lion in silence, and the boy grinning as he leaned toward an old man in a photo Cassandra had shoved across the desk. By morning he made his decision. For once he wouldn't send an assistant or a driver or a lawyer. He would go see for himself. The subway smelled like rust and warm pretzels. Damon stood in the corner of the car, baseball cap pulled, low leather gloves on his hands, and for the first time in decades he felt anonymous. No one cared who he was. A man argued softly with his girlfriend. A teenager scrolled his phone with the sound turned up. An elderly woman in a bright pink hat tapped a Metro card against her knee. Damon let the noise surround him. It was chaotic, but it was honest. When he emerged into Bed-Stuy, the March air bit colder than Manhattan's glass canyons. The block wasn't dangerous, not the way Cassandra had implied. It was worn corners, scuffed graffiti curling on brick walls, but it breathed. People moved in small clusters, kids kicking a ball that skittered into the gutter, a man selling oranges from a crate. The Beacon House sat on the corner, paint-faded windows glowing with yellow light. A mural stretched across its side, two hands passing a flame between them, colors bright against the gray street. On the front steps, mismatched planters held stubborn green shoots. Damon stood for a moment, pulse heavy. Then he pushed open the door. Warmth wrapped him instantly. The air smelled of chicken, soup, cornbread, and something floral he couldn't place. The front room was filled with folding tables, vinyl cloths, mismatched chairs. But the details hit harder, the laughter of three elderly women in scarves leaning across bowls of soup. A man strumming a battered guitar in the corner. Two boys hunched over a chessboard whispering strategy. On the wall, a corkboard covered in paper hearts bore names and notes. Mama Lila sang even when nobody asked. Tasha always brought extra hot sauce. Damon's throat tightened. This wasn't poverty. This was presence. A woman behind the counter spotted him. Mid-50s, maybe, hair wrapped in a bright scarf, hoop earrings catching the light. Her name tag read Mrs. Alvarez. "You're Micah's daddy," she said as if announcing something obvious. He stiffened. "You know my son. Know him. That boy lit this room up last Tuesday. Asked Mr. Washington if war made you forget how to love. Got a 90-year-old vet talking for the first time in months." She laughed warmly. "Micah's serious. But he's not sad here. He's curious." She set a bowl of soup in front of him before he could refuse. "Eat. You can't judge us on an empty stomach." He's Saturday. The soup was simple chicken rice time, but it tasted more like food than anything plated on his penthouse china. Around him, voices wove together, a toddler squealing, a man describing a job interview, someone teasing about checkmate. Damon realized with a strange ache that this noisy, messy layered was the sound of belonging. Mrs. Alvarez leaned closer. "Cassandra Vale came sniffing around here. Took her pictures from across the street. Didn't come in. Said the block was too risky." She studied Damon's face. "You look like a man trying to decide who's telling the truth." He set the spoon down. "Am I supposed to believe this is safe for him?" She smiled gently. "Depends on what you mean by safe. If you mean glass walls, cameras, people pretending not to notice you, then no. If you mean being seen, remembered, called by name, then yes. This is safer than any fortress you've built for him." Damon didn't reply. Instead, he walked slowly to the corkboard of names. He read them one by one. Each was a story stitched to a memory. Not dead, not erased. Held. He thought of the marble silence of his penthouse, and felt for the first time ashamed of its emptiness. In the back room he found the art table. Crayons, paintbrushes, pages scattered. On the wall, a hand-painted banner read, "Finish one story someone else started." Beneath it hung sketches, dragons, gardens, superheroes with crooked smiles. A line of text written in a child's uneven hand. "Even brave mice get scared." Amara started that project. Mrs. Alvarez said quietly behind him. She brought Zion's drawings one day. Said she couldn't carry them alone anymore. So we help her finish. Damon's chest tightened. He imagined his own son bent over this table, filling the pages with color, carrying another child's unfinished story forward. He swallowed hard. "Mr. Reed," Mrs. Alvarez said softly, "your boy isn't ashamed here. He's grateful. He tells people about you. Says his daddy works hard and that makes him want to help other people too. That's not guilt. That's pride turned outward." For a moment, Damon couldn't answer. He thought of Cassandra's warning, she's manipulating him. But all he saw in these walls was Micah's face lit up with connection with purpose. On the subway back, Damon dialed Amara. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Reed." Her voice was cautious. "I saw the Beacon House," he said. "Cassandra called it reckless. She showed me the fire report too." Silence. Then Amara's voice steady. "I should have asked before taking Micah. That was my mistake." But he was asking questions Marble couldn't answer. Service gave him a way to breathe. "I wasn't teaching guilt, Damon. I was teaching connection. And the fire." His throat was dry. A pause. Then, "I was angry. At God, at the city. At how we call some neighborhoods fire traps and do nothing until children die in them. After Zion, I couldn't live with the anger. Volunteering gave it a job, made me safe for people again." The honesty hit him harder than any polished speech. "Thank you," he whispered, but then the line hissed, cracked, and dropped. "Amara." He redialed, straight to voicemail. He tried texting. Message failed. Across the city, Cassandra stood in a sleek office, eyes on a monitor, as a fixer intercepted the call logs. "Make it foggy," she instructed, "enough to make him wonder if she's worth the risk." Back in the penthouse, Damon stared at his phone, frowning at the undelivered text. He looked toward Micah's room where the star-shaped nightlight glowed faintly through the door. He told himself he'd try again at 7. He didn't know the silence between them was no accident. The silence after the dropped call still lingered in Damon's ears. He sat in the library, phone in hand, watching the message to Amara bounce back undelivered. Across the penthouse, Cassandra moved like nothing was wrong, gliding between rooms, giving orders to staff. But Damon couldn't shake the weight of what he'd seen at Beacon House, and the gnawing suspicion that his connection to Amara was being quietly severed. It was Micah who broke the silence. Early the next morning, he padded into the living room pajamas, wrinkled, clutching a piece of paper. His crayon sketch was messy, but earnest boxes of green drawn across a wide rectangle, yellow flowers rising in clumps. A stick figure boy kneeling beside them. At the top, in crooked letters, "Mommy's Garden." "Daddy," Micah said, voice tight with hope. "Can we make this on the terrace, just some pots? Mommy used to love lavender and basil. I think she'd like it if we grew things that smell like her." Damon took the sketch carefully, as if it were glass. For a moment he saw the terrace in his mind, not sterile stone and steel chairs, but alive, scented with herbs. A place where his boy could touch life instead of polished surfaces. But before he could answer, Cassandra's heels clicked across the marble. She looked down at the drawing with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, smoothly, crouching to Micah's level. "Gardens are lovely in theory. But on a terrace, they bring bugs, mud, mess. Imagine guests stepping out in evening wear and finding dirt under their shoes. Not very elegant, don't you think?" Micah's shoulders drooped. "But it's just a little garden. Mommy liked flowers." "Darling, I know you miss her," Cassandra interrupted, gently patting his knee. "But we have to think about the bigger picture. Your father entertains investors here. The terrace is part of the image. We can always buy fresh flowers." The words landed like stones. Damon watched as the light drained from his son's face, the fragile dream collapsing before it could take root. Micah folded the sketch in half, then half again until it was a crumpled square in his palm. He didn't argue. He simply shrank, shoulders curling inward. Something twisted hard in Damon's chest. He'd seen that same look at business tables, grown men folding dreams under the weight of polite refusals. But on his son it was unbearable. That afternoon the tension simmered. Micah sat quietly in the corner of the library, sketchbook closed, Simba tucked under his chin. Cassandra breezed in with her laptop, scrolling through emails as if nothing had happened. Damon tried to work, but the silence cracked when Micah finally spoke. "Cassandra," he said suddenly, voice thin but steady. "Do you not like Amara because of where she's from?" The air froze. Damon's pen stilled in his hand. Cassandra looked up slowly, smile faltering. "Sweetheart," she began carefully, "Amara is from a very different world, and sometimes people from those worlds don't understand the responsibilities that come with ours." Micah tilted his head, eyes narrowing in a way that reminded Damon of cross-examinations. "So, is it because she's black?" The question cut through the room like lightning. Cassandra's breath caught. "Of course not," she said quickly, her laugh too high. "Race has nothing to do with it. This is about compatibility, about values, about what's appropriate for a family like yours." Damon felt heat rise in his chest. He had heard this language before in boardrooms, in social clubs, in the coded conversations of power. It was bias dressed in etiquette, prejudice wrapped in polish. And now his son, 7 years old, had seen through it. Micah lowered his gaze. "She told me being poor doesn't make you bad, and being rich doesn't make you good. She said what matters is how you treat people, even people who can't give you anything back." Damon's throat tightened. Those words, simple, clear, stripped away every excuse Cassandra had crafted. That evening, Amara returned with a worn leather portfolio under her arm. Micah rushed to her sketch, still crumpled in his pocket. She opened the portfolio and laid it gently on the table. Inside were Zion's drawings, dragons in crooked armor, houses with too many windows, mice with crowns. Micah touched the pages as if they were relics. "He used to say stories don't end just because someone leaves," Amara told him. "They wait for someone else to finish them." Micah looked up at Damon. "Daddy, can I help finish them? For Zion." Damon saw the hope there, the same hope that had wilted under Cassandra's polite refusal hours earlier. This time something in him broke open. "Yes," he said firmly, voice shaking with conviction. "You can, and we will." For the first time he didn't stay silent. Cassandra moved quickly, pivoting as if nothing had happened. That night after Micah went to bed, she cornered Damon in the study. Her perfume filled the air, heavy, deliberate. "You're letting gratitude cloud your judgment," she said softly, stepping closer. "This woman saved your son, yes, and she's filling his head with dangerous ideas. But you, Alexander Damon Reed, you're a man who knows the difference between sympathy and strategy." He turned sharply. "What are you implying?" Her smile curved. "That you're confusing attraction with responsibility. You think you're protecting your son, but really you're enthralled by this tragic, noble figure who walked into your life at just the right moment. She makes you feel something you haven't in years. That's not family, Damon. That's projection." Her words stung because they mirrored his own secret doubts. Was it true? Was he clinging to Amara not only for Micah's sake but for his own aching loneliness? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. A push notification. Anonymous. He opened it. A video. Grainy, shaky Amara sitting on a park bench, head bowed, shoulders shaking with sobs. But the clip had been edited. The camera lingered on Micah's photo sticking out of her portfolio, then cut abruptly to her, clutching the book to her chest. The caption beneath it read, "Obsession or care, how safe is your son?" A chill swept through Damon. It was a reputational bomb timed, perfectly designed to destroy. On the screen, Amara's grief had been twisted into something sinister, and the message beneath it was clear: "This will end you." Damon stared at the phone, Cassandra's perfume heavy in the air, Micah's laughter from the flower-covered kitchen echoing in his memory. And for the first time he realized this war was no longer about love or grief. It was about survival. The anonymous video hadn't left Damon's mind. Even as Cassandra swore it was evidence they needed to act before disaster, Damon knew it was a weapon cut, spliced, designed to rot trust. He didn't confront her outright. Instead, he did what he always did when a storm gathered: he looked for compromise. That was how they ended up in the Adirondacks. The lodge sat on a mountain ridge, 20 rooms of rustic stone and timber, surrounded by 500 acres of snowbound wilderness. Damon had hosted investor retreats. Their seclusion meant privacy. Cassandra pitched it as bonding. Fresh air, fireplaces, father and son activities. He needs to detach from influences. Damon heard the unsaid word, Amara. Micah arrived, clutching Zion's leather portfolio to his chest. He refused to sled, refused to skate, refused to join the family dinners Cassandra staged with polished formality. Instead, he sat by the fireplace, tracing Zion's drawings as if they were scripture. On the second evening, the local forecast shifted. A storm front roared south, high winds, heavy snow. Damon suggested calling Amara. She knows how to calm him when he spirals. Cassandra's smile hardened. Absolutely not. You bring her here and every guest will think you've replaced a fiancée with a nanny. Optics, Damon. Optics matter. Micah overheard. His face shut down. That night he pushed food around his plate silent until he asked one thing before bed. "Daddy, can I just call her to say good night?" Cassandra cut in. "Micah, darling, you must learn independence. You'll never grow strong if you need someone holding your hand at every bedtime." Damon watched the boy nod, lips pressed tight, and hated himself for not arguing. The storm arrived just before dawn. Wind screamed through the pines, snow slashed against the lodge windows. Damon woke uneasy and went to check Micah's room. Empty. The bed covers tossed aside. The back door ajar, a spray of snow across the mudroom tiles. Tiny boot prints led out into the white. "Micah!" Damon's roar echoed through the halls. Staff scrambled. Cassandra appeared in a silk robe, face pale. He can't have gone outside. Not in this weather. But Damon was already dragging on boots, heart hammering. The cold hit like a wall air so sharp it burned his throat. Snow-blinded wind shoved him sideways. He stumbled after the tracks until they vanished beneath drifts. Panic clawed at his chest. He screamed his son's name into the white voice, breaking lungs, searing. Minutes bled into an hour. His legs numbed. His vision blurred. For the first time in his life, Damon Reed knew helplessness so total it felt like drowning. And then light. A faint glow through the storm. A lantern swaying. A figure crouched beside a small form bundled in blankets. "Amara!" His voice cracked. She turned snow, clinging to her braids, eyes fierce even in exhaustion. "He's safe. Pulse steady. We need to get him warm." Micah stirred weakly in her arms. "Daddy." Damon stumbled toward them, gathering both into his embrace, tears freezing on his cheeks. How did you?" Micah answered before Amara could. "I called her. From the office phone. Yesterday. In case." His voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. In case nobody else listened. Amara adjusted the blanket around him. "He remembered my number. I left Boston the minute he called. Got here before the roads closed. Nurses aren't trained for miracles, Damon, but we are trained for systems. I mapped the search-marked compass points. He went downhill, so I went downhill." Her voice was calm, but Damon heard the cost her trembling hands, the frost on her lashes. She had risked everything. And she had won. Together they staggered back toward the lodge, the lantern's glow their only guide. By the time they reached the hearth, staff rushed to wrap Micah in quilts, hot water bottles tucked around him. Amara knelt, rubbing his hands, checking each finger for frostbite, speaking to him steadily, grounding him with touch and tone. Damon hovered, terrified, grateful, undone. Then Cassandra's voice sliced through the warmth. "This is outrageous." She stood at the edge of the circle robe, replaced by a sleek wool dress, eyes cold. "She shows up out of nowhere in the middle of a storm with my fiancé son in her arms. How convenient." Damon turned slowly. "Convenient? Yes," Cassandra said crisply. "You all see a savior. I see an opportunist. A woman who inserts herself into a family, manufactures dependence, then appears at the exact moment she's most needed. That's not rescue, it's strategy." "Enough," Damon snapped. But she didn't stop. She stepped closer, voice rising. "This is kidnapping, Damon. She had no right to take him from this lodge. You don't know what she told him, what she planned. And I won't stand by while your reputation, our reputation, gets dragged through scandal." Amara's hands never stopped moving over Micah's, warming them, steadying him. Her eyes lifted once, calm but unflinching. "I didn't take him. He called me. Because he knew I would come." The crackle of fire filled the silence. Then faint at first, but growing louder, sirens. Cutting through the storm, approaching the lodge. Cassandra folded her arms, satisfaction flashing in her smile. "I called the state police," she said evenly. "Let's see how your heroine explains this one." Damon's stomach dropped. Micah clung tighter to Amara's wrist, eyes wide with fear. The storm outside had not ended. It had only changed shape. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the snowstorm like knives. Micah clutched Amara's wrist so tightly her knuckles whitened. Damon stood between them and the door chest, heaving the heat of the fire at his back and the cold howl of the storm pressing against the windows. Cassandra waited near the hearth, arms folded, her expression perfectly composed, as if she had orchestrated this moment frame by frame. The knock was hard, official. 2 New York State troopers stepped in, snow still on their jackets. Their eyes swept the room, Amara kneeling by the boy, Damon blocking like a shield. Cassandra with her lips parted in manufactured relief. "Mom," the taller trooper said to Cassandra, "we received a report of a possible abduction." Cassandra gestured elegantly toward Amara. "There she is. Arrived without permission. Took the child out into a storm." Micah cried out, "That's not true, I called her." He leapt in front of Amara, small body shaking, eyes blazing. "She saved me." The room seemed to hold its breath. Damon stepped forward. His voice was low but thundered with conviction. "She saved our lives. Both of us would have frozen out there without her." The shorter trooper exchanged a glance with his partner. "We'll need statements," he said carefully. "From everyone." They sat around the long wooden table of the lodge. Snow still pounded the windows. The troopers spread out notebooks. Cassandra, smooth as silk, produced a folder from her leather bag. "I anticipated you might need context," she said sweetly, sliding the papers across. "Miss Collins has a history. Terminated from a pediatric ward after a fire. Liability unresolved." Amara's shoulders tensed. Damon caught the flicker in her eyes, not shame but the old relentless ache of memory. Cassandra leaned back, folding her hands like a prosecutor. "You see, this isn't the first time she's placed children at risk," Micah shouted. "That's a lie." His small fists balled. Amara touched his shoulder gently. "It's all right," she whispered. Then she lifted her gaze to the troopers. "I'll tell you what happened." The room fell quiet. Even the storm outside seemed to hush. Her voice was steady, but every word cost something. The clinic was on the ground floor of a public housing building in Roxbury. I was a pediatric nurse. That night, a fire started in an upstairs apartment. The alarms were old, half of them broken. Smoke rolled down the stairwells before anyone realized. We were ordered to evacuate. But I heard children screaming. I ran back in. She paused, eyes fixed on her hands. One of them was my son, Zion. I carried him out in my arms. I thought I'd made it. But smoke, it steals faster than flame. He never woke up. Damon closed his eyes. The words struck like blows, yet she delivered them without theatrics, only truth. I wasn't fired. Amara continued quietly. The ward shut down for rebuilding after the fire. I resigned because I couldn't walk those halls without hearing him. Volunteering was the only way I could live with myself. Guilt needed somewhere to go, so I turned it into service. Into love for other people's children. The taller trooper's pen stopped scratching. Silence pressed in, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Micah slid his hand into hers. "She didn't take me," he said fiercely. "I took her. I called her, because I knew she would come." The shorter trooper nodded slowly. "Miss Vale," he said, turning to Cassandra, "you understand that knowingly filing a false report is a criminal offense." Cassandra's face blanched, then recovered in a flash. "I acted in good faith. I believed, that will be all," the trooper cut in. "We'll note this incident as unfounded. But I suggest you think twice before misusing emergency resources." They gathered their things, offered Damon a curt nod, and left, boots crunching back into the storm. The door closed. Silence returned, heavy, suffocating. When they were gone, Damon turned. His voice was no longer measured. It was raw, stripped of pretense. "You lied," he said to Cassandra. "You weaponized her grief. You turned my son's fear into leverage." Cassandra lifted her chin. "I protected you. Do you not see she's already cost lives? And you're falling for it. If you choose her, Damon, you lose everything we've built. The board, the investors, the empire." He stepped closer, fury in his eyes. "If empire means crushing my son's spirit, if it means smearing a woman who carried him out of the dark, then maybe it's worth losing." For the first time, Cassandra's mask cracked. But only for a beat. She moved nearer, voice dropping to a whisper sharp as glass. "If you send me away, I'm not the one you should fear." Boardrooms feed on scandal. One video, one whisper in the right ear, and you'll watch everything burn. Her words hung like smoke. Damon saw them for what they were, not love, not loyalty, control. He looked past her to where Amara sat by the hearth, Micah asleep in her lap, the boy's hand curled around her sleeve as if he'd never let go. "Go," Damon said quietly. Cassandra's eyes flared. But she didn't argue. She only straightened her coat, smoothed her hair, and walked out into the storm with a final look that promised war. The fire popped in the silence she left behind. The lodge still smelled of smoke and wet wool when Cassandra left, her words trailing like a curse boardroom's feed on scandal. Damon carried that warning back to Manhattan as if it had lodged itself in his chest, beating in time with every email alert that flashed across his phone. He felt it in the wary glances of his assistants, in the silence of investors who had once called twice a day. The first strike came quietly, as they always did. An anonymous email subject line, "Do you know who's raising Damon Reed's son?" The text dripped, "Poison unstable nurse terminated after a fire, grief rituals performed with a vulnerable child, evidence of emotional dependency, endangerment." Attached were grainy screenshots of Amara lighting the small star-shaped lamp beside Micah's bed, of the boy holding Zion's drawings, edited to look ritualistic, cult-like. Within hours, whispers spread across investor circles. Within a day, lifestyle blogs had recycled the claims, and by week's end, a glossy magazine published a piece under the headline, "Billionaire Heir Entrusted to Grief-Stricken Nanny." The damage was immediate. In the high-rise office that overlooked the Hudson, Damon's PR chief cornered him with the bluntness of a man who measured morality by optics. "Look," he said, slick hair gleaming, too much cologne in the air. "This is blood in the water. The market hates uncertainty. You want it to stop? Distance yourself. Release her quietly. Frame it as gratitude, then closure." The press cycle moves on. Damon stared at him in silence, rage and disbelief rising, until he finally answered with a steel edge in his voice. "She saved my son's life. If you can't find a way to make truth look louder, you're in the wrong job." The PR man blinked, already calculating exit strategies, but Damon didn't care. He'd already chosen his side. The truth sprouted in dirt. It began with 2 clay pots on the terrace, lavender and basil, just as Micah had drawn in his crayon sketch. Beacon House volunteers visited on weekends, guiding his small hands through the soil. Soon, the sterile stone terrace transformed into rows of herbs and flowers, rosemary, thyme, marigolds, and even a stubborn rosebush fighting the Manhattan wind. One Saturday, a Beacon House gardener, an old man with calloused hands, shoved a pair of gloves into Damon's palms. "Get your nails dirty, sir. He'll remember that longer than a trust fund." Damon hesitated, but Micah looked up, eyes bright, so Damon knelt. For the first time in years, dirt caked beneath his nails, sweat darkened his shirt collar, and he felt the soil break open under his hands. Micah beamed, and for a moment Damon wasn't a CEO, wasn't a man fighting scandal. He was just a father planting alongside his son. Staff members whispered, neighbors leaned over balconies, and phones captured the image. Soon the photos leaked, but differently from Cassandra's narrative. Headlines reframed him: "Damon Reed, soil under his nails, son on his shoulders." For a fleeting moment, the story bent toward grace, toward humanity. Cassandra, though, was never far. Her back channels pulsed with venom, gossip seated at charity luncheons, whispers at donor meetings, coded emails to reporters suggesting that Beacon House was a front for radical activism. She used phrases like emotional grooming, exploitation of grief, feeding them to journalists willing to print shadows as facts. Each leak was designed not to kill outright, but to wound slowly, to drain credibility drop by drop. Yet in her precision, she made one mistake: she trusted her own voice. The charity gala glittered in chandeliers and crystal. Damon arrived in reluctant formality, his tie too tight, his smile taut. Micah stayed home with Amara, sketching Zion's dragons and tending lavender. Cassandra moved through the ballroom in sequins that caught the light. Donors clustered at her elbow, her voice purring with poison disguised as sophistication. A young server polishing glasses lingered too close, phone recording by accident the mic live as Cassandra leaned in. "We had to clean neighborhoods like Bed-Stuy out of the donor pool," she bragged, laughing softly. "Optics, my dear. You can't have your heir photographed in soup kitchens. Investors expect polish. That nanny liability. That video, I staged the edits myself. Necessary. Survival of the fittest." She sipped champagne, unaware that her own voice was threading a noose. The server, shocked, uploaded the clip to a private chat. Within hours, someone leaked it to Twitter. By dawn, it was viral. Hashtags bloomed: number, cleaned out number, truth leaks number, Reed Empire. Millions heard Cassandra's own voice sneering at poor neighborhoods, mocking grief rituals, boasting of manipulation. Screens across the country replayed her words, dissected her diction, condemned her cruelty. Corporate sponsors fled. Her charity board severed ties overnight. A diversity initiative she had fronted collapsed within a day, donors scrambling to avoid contamination. Think pieces proliferated, painting her as the embodiment of polished prejudice, the smiling face of systemic rot. By the second evening, Cassandra Vale's reputation was radioactive, her name trending for all the wrong reasons. Damon should have felt relief. He should have felt vindicated. Instead, he sat in his office, the city spread below, when his CFO entered, pale and stiff. "They're moving," he said softly. Damon frowned. "Who?" "The board. They're drafting a vote to unseat you. Reason: reckless judgment. Hostile environment risk." Cassandra's collapse scorched the empire by association. "They want distance. They'll call you complicit. They'll call Amara the match that lit this fire." Damon turned slowly to the window, gaze falling to the terrace below where Micah knelt by the lavender. Amara beside him, both heads bent in quiet attention to the fragile green life between stone and sky. For a moment, Damon felt the weight of all the years he had built walls instead of gardens, boardrooms instead of homes. He thought the worst was over, that Cassandra's exposure was the end. He was wrong. The battle was only shifting fields. And he remembered her final whisper: boardrooms feed on scandal. She had left the stage in disgrace, but the machinery she belonged to was still humming, still hungry, still ready to feast on him next. By morning, the city had already read its verdicts in the scrolling markets and buzzing group chats. Damon woke to a calendar stacked with emergency invites and a dozen blandly threatening emails from people who had once called him friend. He showered, shaved, and dressed with the mechanical grace of a man walking toward a fight he couldn't afford to win in the old way. On the kitchen counter lay Micah's newest drawing, 4 figures in a square of green, Damon in a dark suit, with his tie flying like a flag, Amara with her gentle smile. Micah holding both their hands, and beside Amara a boy with a crown drawn, too big for his head, Zion. Above them a row of boxy planters sprouted crooked flowers. In the corner, a star-shaped lamp glowed yellow. He slid the paper into a leather folio, along with a thin stack of slides, numbers he could defend, and one page with no data at all, just the word WHY centered on the screen. The boardroom had been designed to hush people. Glass wall, powder blue carpet, a table long enough to make unanimity feel mandatory. The directors were already seated when he walked in, each flanked by a tablet and a carafe of water, each wearing the expression of power dressed as reason. A handful he trusted. The rest could be counted on to count themselves first. He didn't take the head of the table. He chose the side closest to the windows where the river made its slow, stubborn way through the city. No one commented, but a few glances flicked quick as gnats. The chair cleared his throat. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. There are concerns about judgment, about reputational risk, about power," Damon said calmly. "Let's call it by its name so we don't tell the wrong story." Silence puckered. The chair gestured at the screen. "You asked to present." Damon clicked to his first slide: revenue line, steady debt, manageable hospitality properties above benchmark in occupancy despite market headwinds. The next slides came clean and quick: customer lifetime value trending up since the company shifted away from concierge theatrics toward community partnerships. Employee retention improvements in properties where bereavement leave had been extended and grief support added. Cost savings where local procurement replaced performative luxury vendors. He spoke like an operator who remembered every pipe behind the drywall, because he did. He moved through the numbers with an unhurried efficiency that made interruption feel foolish. "And yet," the chair said, fingers steepled, "the market punishes scandal. Your personal entanglements have created a perception of instability." Damon clicked again. The screen went blank except for WHY. He let the word sit. "We build places for people to gather. Our moat is not our marble. It's trust. You want to know what the market punishes more than scandal?" He tapped the word with his remote. "Hollowness. We've been selling a version of safety that looks good in pictures and starves people in practice." A rustle. One director snorted softly. Another pretended to polish her glasses. Damon slipped Micah's drawing from the folio and placed it in front of him as if it were a contract. "This is my son's vision of what a home should feel like: a garden, messy and alive, with a place for the people we've lost to still belong." He glanced toward the windows, then back. "We can be the company that learns from that, or we can keep polishing our glass while the world walks past us to places that actually hold them." The chair's mouth thinned. "Poetic. But we are not a social service agency. Exactly, Damon said. We are a hospitality company. The business of turning strangers into guests, and guests into repeat family. If we don't understand grief, community ritual, if we don't build for human life in all its reality, someone else will, and they'll eat our lunch. A woman near the end of the table spoke for the first time. Miss Ruth Ellison had served on the board longer than most of them had been out of grad school. She wore her hair cropped close and her pearls without apology. Her voice carried the softness of a church mother and the iron of a union organizer. "Son," she said, and half the room bristled at the word even as the other half sat up straighter. "Are you asking us to bless a moral makeover or a business pivot?" Both Damon said, unabashed. "Here's the plan." He clicked to a simple map of the United States. Dots bloomed existing properties, pipeline projects, overlaid a second constellation communities within a 5-mile radius of every asset, with a deficit of grief resources, schools without counselors, churches without partners, neighborhoods without aftercare. We ring-fence 10% of discretionary philanthropic budgets and operationalize them, he said. No more performative galas. We seed beacon-style hubs in our markets' kitchens that serve 2 hours a day rooms for evening remembrance circles, small grants to local grief counselors, micro-libraries for kids who need a place to put their missing, programming tied to our properties, teams' volunteer hours count toward bonuses. We call it Zion's Beacon until we find a name the communities choose for themselves. A hand shot up. "You're proposing to cut our gala spend and redirect to food pantries, to belonging infrastructure," Damon corrected. "Food is a door. Memory is a chair. People come back to places that seat them when they're most breakable. And when people come back, revenue follows." The chair's jaw flexed. "You're asking us to sanctify your scandal." "I'm asking you to recognize that the scandal already sanctified me," Damon said. "I learned what our properties were missing from a 7-year-old boy and a woman you tried to make into a weapon. The lesson is free. Ignoring it would be expensive." A younger director leaned in. "Even if we believed in this, and I'm not saying I do, you're still poison to donors right now. Cassandra's implosion splashed all our logos. We need distance." Damon nodded. "Then I'll give you distance." He pushed a single sheet across the table. "My resignation as CEO, effective upon board approval of the new division charter and budget. I'll move to executive chair over community strategy for a 2-year term. After that, you can vote me off the island if you want. But the pivot lives. Ring-fenced, audited, externally untouchable by anyone who wants to ride donors instead of serving communities." The room didn't breathe. The chair's eyebrows climbed a millimeter. "You're offering your head." "I'm offering my throne," Damon said quietly, "because I finally know what kingdom I want to keep." The minutes that followed were the longest of his career. A lawyer whispered to the chair. A financier texted under the table. Someone cleared his throat twice the way people do when they want to sound in charge of their own bodies. It would have been funny if it weren't about to redraw his life. Then Miss Ruth reached into her tote and pulled out her phone, not to text but to cue a video. She turned up the volume and placed it on the table. Cassandra's voice spilled into the room, crisp as glass breaking. "We had to clean neighborhoods like Bed-Stuy out of the donor pool. That video, I staged the edits myself." The directors flinched as if truth were louder when it wore the tone of a woman they had trusted too easily. Ruth let the clip end. She swiped to a second image, a photo of Damon on his terrace, hands in soil. Micah beaming behind him with dirt smeared across his cheek like war paint. "I don't pass out sainthood for planting basil," she said dryly. "But I do know the difference between a man who can learn and a board that can't. I also know coded bias when it sachets into a meeting wrapped in etiquette. We were all real quick to clutch our pearls when a black woman lit a nightlight and called it remembrance, but we didn't blink when a white woman called cleaning out Bed-Stuy optics." A few directors winced. The chair's face went politely blank. Ruth looked down the table past Damon, past the chair, as if seeing farther than the windows would admit. "I come from a church where we set an extra chair for the dead at homecoming," she said softly. "Not because we think ghosts eat potato salad, but because memory has a shape and it needs a seat. Your company, Mr. Chair, has been seating bankers and leaving out the folks who actually teach the rest of us how to be human when the bottom falls out." Damon's right, hospitality without a chair for grief is just real estate. Silence landed like a benediction and a dare. The chair folded his hands, considered optics, considered votes, considered the way the clip of Cassandra was still echoing across the internet. At last, we'll take this in 2 motions. 1, to establish the division as proposed with an initial 3-year budget and external audit. 2, to accept Mr. Reed's transition as executive chair overseeing the division and to appoint an interim CEO from internal candidates. The votes were not unanimous. They did not need to be. The motions carried. Damon exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since Fifth Avenue turned to rain. He wasn't winning exactly. He was trading. Afterward, in the small anteroom where deals went to be blessed or buried, Ruth found him staring at Micah's drawing again. She touched the corner where the star-shaped lamp bled yellow into the sky. "Hold on to this when your calendar forgets what your heart just did," she said. "The first year of a pivot is all potholes." He smiled a little, broke open. "Thank you. Don't thank me," she said. "Bring those garden kids to my church when you need voices who can sing you through a bad quarter." He laughed, promised, and meant it. By the time he reached the elevator, his phone had already begun to howl press legal allies trolls. He silenced it. There were calls to make and bridges to rebuild, but first, there was home. The penthouse did not feel like a museum that afternoon. It felt like a studio in the middle of being born. The formal dining room had been rolled back to the walls and covered in butcher paper. On one flank, shallow bins of markers, crayons, and watercolors. On the other, a row of clipboards and low stools. The star-shaped nightlight had been moved to a shelf, a small lighthouse waiting for dusk. The terrace door was cracked. Rosemary pushed its scent into the room like an invitation. Micah looked up from the table, face bright. "Dad, miss." Ruth texted Amara. "She says her church has a kitchen that wants to do a soup thing on Thursdays." She sent a picture of a big blue pot. He spread his arms as if measuring it. "This big." Amara stood at the counter sorting donated brushes by size. She watched Damon's face the way you watch a weather forecast when your plans depend on it. "How bad?" she asked quietly. He told them the truth, in simple pieces. The vote, the division, the step down that wasn't a step back so much as a step sideways toward the thing that mattered. Micah listened with deep seriousness, then pointed at his own drawing on the counter. "So, the garden wins. The garden wins," Damon said. Micah's relief moved through his body like sunlight. He ran to the terrace, yelled at the Rosemary, as if it were a friend who'd just passed a tough test, then barreled back inside. "Can she stay forever?" he asked, breathless, looking from Damon to Amara. "Not as help. As us." Silence pooled heavy, with all the ways an adult can turn a child's simple question into a complicated speech. Damon didn't make a speech. He turned to Amara. "I should have said it sooner," he told her. "I don't want you here because you saved us, though you did. I want you here because this house doesn't know how to be a home without you. Not as staff. As family if you want it." Amara's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "Family is a word we should be careful with," she said, voice steady. "It doesn't erase grief. It makes room for it." Damon nodded. "Then let's make room." Micah tugged at Amara's sleeve. "Can Zion live with us too?" He held up the leather portfolio with reverence. "In the stories, I mean. We can finish them all so he doesn't have to be lonely." Amara placed her hand over his on the worn leather. "He's been waiting for someone to say that out loud," she whispered. "Yes, let's let him live here in the stories." They worked until late, transforming the room piece by piece. On the wall above the table, they taped a banner that read Zion's Beacon in Micah's uneven print. Beneath it, they made a circle of small stools, a soft basket of smooth stones for fidgeting fingers, a jar of tea lights to mimic the star lamp when more people would come. At 6:50, Damon turned off every ceiling fixture and let the room fall gentle. At 6:59, he carried the nightlight to the center of the circle and set it on a low table. At 7, they gathered. It wasn't a crowd. Just the 3 of them and 2 Beacon House elders who'd ridden up in the service elevator, Mrs. Alvarez smelling of cardamom and laundry soap, and Mr. Washington, his spine straight even when the elevator lurched, his hat in his lap. "You need a tenor?" he'd asked in the lobby. and Mrs. Alvarez had snorted. You barely need baritone, but come on. They lit one tea light for Janelle, one for Zion, one for the family we're building. Micah insisted, putting his 2 hands around the glass as if to warm it into flame faster. Damon had never known 7 o'clock could sound like breathing together. They shared one memory each. Janelle's rain song that made thunder a friendly rumor. Zion's dragons who cried when no one was watching. Mr. Washington's wife who had once laughed so hard she spilled lemonade on the church pew and never lived it down. Mrs. Alvarez's sister who had always added too much garlic and swore it was the Holy Spirit measuring. When the circle ended, no one clapped. That was the point. They sat in the small warmth and let it be enough. Then the doorbell rang. No one moved at first. It was a gentle sound, almost polite. Damon stood. On the way to the door, he registered a few practical facts the guard had not called up. The elevator camera would have recorded the visitor. His phone was face down on the counter. He had an impulse he trusted now more than any calendar: protect the circle. He stepped into the entryway and pulled the heavy door open. A man in a dark coat stood with a leather portfolio. The wrong kind of portfolio snapped shut like a trap. His smile was brief and professional. Mr. Reed, service of process. He handed over a sheaf of papers thick enough to feel like winter. On behalf of our client, Miss Cassandra Vale. Damon didn't look down. Not yet. He could smell toner and a hint of the cologne every mid-tier litigator wore to feel taller. What is it? He asked, though he already knew. Defamation, the man said. Counts include tortious interference, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a few other spices. We'll see you in court. He nodded, pivoted neatly, and walked to the elevator with the posture of a man in a hurry to be out of the story. Damon closed the door softly. In the studio, the star lamp still hummed a small moon on a low table. Amara looked up. Micah's eyes went instantly to Damon's hands. He carried the papers to the counter and set them down as if they might bruise the wood. For a heartbeat, the room held 2 worlds, the one where people remember the dead together, and the one where paper tries to make memory a liability. Mrs. Alvarez rose first, slid her arm through Damon's without making a ceremony of it. We'll make tea, she said. Then we'll read what needs reading. And after that you'll try a cookie you don't like because Micah mixed the spices wrong and we're all going to tell him it's a masterpiece. Micah's chin lifted. They're good, he insisted, indignant and brave. We'll decide, Mr. Washington said gravely, already crossing to the kitchen. Amara met Damon's eyes. For a second, grief and humor and steel braided there something stronger than any injunction. Boardrooms feed on scandal, she said softly, but circles feed on truth. He nodded the smallest bow to an altar he hadn't known how to name until now. Then we build more circles. Outside, the river moved on its old mission. Inside, the tea water simmered. The papers waited. So did the children's stories. Damon picked up Micah's drawing and pinned it to the wall above the banner so it would be the first thing anyone saw when the next circle came through the door. The kingdom he wanted was not made of votes. It was made of chairs. And there were chairs to set before the fight got louder. In court, Cassandra's case collapsed in minutes. The audio of her own voice. The metadata. The footage undeniable. The judge dismissed with prejudice and warned of sanctions. Damon walked out not with victory but with clarity. Truth had burned clean. Zion's beacon launched publicly. Evening remembrance, circles, terrace, gardens, and grief programs spread nationwide. In the penthouse, the dining room became a studio where children finished Zion's stories. Micah co-authored his first book, The Mouse That Taught a Dragon to Breathe. At the first 7 p.m. circle, Damon read a letter to Janelle. Amara placed Zion's sketchbook on a stand not as a shrine but as a seedbed of hope. Later, the board begged Damon to take back full control. He refused. I already have a kingdom. It just looks different than yours. That night, 3 candles glowed on the terrace, one for Janelle, one for Zion, one for the family they were building. Micah asked, Dad, what do people inherit from us? Damon answered, a map to find each other. And to you at 7 p.m. tonight, light a flame, say a name you want remembered, and do one act of kindness in their honor. If this story touched you, comment 1. If it needs improving, comment 2. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Thank you, and see you in the next one.